The hospitality sector is very large, it's very diverse, it's very varied, it's very fragmented. There are very many different ways of operating. It never fails to amaze me just how many different ways you can buy and sell food and drink. It's very difficult in an environment like that to have regulations that are prescriptive. And the food hygiene regulations overcome that by using a framework based on hazard analysis that allows operators to use the knowledge of their businesses and make specific decisions that suit them rather than being prescriptive. There is often more than one way to comply with the food hygiene regulations. The regulations themselves dictate what businesses should be doing, but the how they should be doing it is basically left to them. And this is where the industry guide comes in. It's written by industry for industry and guides businesses on how they can comply with what the regulations require. And although industry is our primary market, we're well aware that there's a very important secondary market, secondary audience, which of course is enforcement officers. And the enforcement officers like to use the guide. Firstly, it's easier to read than the regulations. But secondly, the officers can say to the businesses, look, this isn't me telling you to do this. This is what your own industry is saying that you should be doing. And so from an enforcement officer's point of view, it has that added authority. The model, this regulation model, is proven. It's been around for 27 years. Since 1995, food hygiene regulations were enacted. It's 6 years since the last update, which, as you can see, in the lifespan of the guide is not particularly long. And there have been no major changes in food hygiene regulations in that time. But there have been some associated regulations, such as Natasha's Law and PPDS, that have come into force. But also, life moves on. We've had case law. We've had inquests. We've had coroner's prevention of death reports. We've had changes in policy at the Food Standard Agency, Food Standard Scotland, and amongst local authorities. Over the last couple of years, there have been frequent requests steadily on a weekly basis made to the FSA asking if the industry guide was going to be updated, as well as saying how you can comply with what the regulations require. It's very much a bottom-up meets top-down exercise, that actually the regulations come from the agencies and then the how we comply comes from business via the industry guide. And an important part of the update is making sure that top-down and bottom-up are aligned and actually do meet. And that's been a very important part of this exercise. Because it's only been 6 years, only 6 years since the last review, the FSA, FSS and UKH saw this very much as a light touch refresh rather than a fundamental review. And any fundamental changes were considered out of scope for this particular exercise. Perhaps the most important change is the one that's been mentioned already, which is the move to a digital platform, which will allow the guide to be updated more regularly and allow it to be more flexible. And there are likely to be ongoing changes over the coming months and years, not least in the area of food hypersensitivity. To carry out the exercise, we set up some project teams. The UKHospitality Food Experts Group, which we regularly get 35, 40 major companies attending, acted as the steering committee for the project. There was a management team that consisted of representatives from FSA, FSS, and UKHospitality with local authority representation, and then a working group with those members there. And I'd like to particularly thank those working members for their contribution to the guide. It's been a hard job to get this thing over the line. It really has. And there are some people at the Food Standard Agency and FSS, particularly Nicholas Dawson, Griselle Britton, Michael Bluff, and David Wilkie Thorburn, who really did stick at it and helped me get this thing over the line. And I'm really indebted to them. The food agencies get their fair share of criticism. It comes with the territory. But I can only speak as I find, and this has been a very positive project. I found the people at both food agencies very knowledgeable, very professional, and very supportive of what we were trying to do. And I'm very grateful for that. It's fair to say that we have cast our net very widely for expertise and assistance. And I'd like to highlight a few people. You can't do a section on allergens without talking about Hazel Gowland and speaking to Hazel Gowland. She is the UK expert on all things to do with food hypersensitivity. But also Helen Dodd from Hyndburn Borough Council, who helped bring the Megan Lee prosecution a couple of years ago. She was very helpful. And I'd like to single out Karen Goodburn. Wow, what a lady she is and what knowledge she has. Tremendous assistance in actually chilled food and shelf lives. And of course, Dr. Lisa Ackley, who I called on from time to time to assist throughout the project. And all of the policy teams at both the food agencies, Zero Waste Scotland. But of course, UKHospitality members were great contributors. And I'd particularly like to thank Food Alert for their technical expertise throughout the ongoing project. So let's have a look at the new sections. And there's the 4 new sections up on the screen. Firstly, food crime. Requested by the Food Standard Agency, a very simple section that informs businesses what to look out for and what to do if they suspect food crime has occurred. We actually did enhance this section with the feedback from the open consultation. And thank you to all of those who participated in that. As a result, we were able to enhance this section with more examples and indicators the business should be looking out for. Surplus food and donating leftover food to charity. This was suggested by a member of UKHospitality. And I actually asked Nando's, Pret aren't members, but they should be, Nando's and Pret to write this particular section. And then Sodexo peer-reviewed it, and then Julia Wilson from Food Alert checked it. And I thought, what a wonderful exercise that was to do. And I think only UKHospitality could have achieved something like that. The freezing and defrosting of food, new section, which has been added onto the freezing section, this looks particularly at the impact of freezing and defrosting upon use-by dates. As a result of case law, it is now de facto an offence to sell or supply food beyond its use-by date. This could create a problem when freezing and defrosting food, and we've introduced into the guide advice and guidance on how to manage that. The final section on this screen, chilled vacuum-packed meats. You may remember the Russell Hume malarkey of a few years ago and the meat hygiene scandal. Well, this section provides advice on shelf life for fresh, raw, vacuum-packed meats. And it provides links to other more specialist guidance. The allergen section has probably had more changes than any other, and it's been updated to reflect new case law and policy changes. A good practice section has been added on the cleaning of ice machines. This was requested by enforcement officers who seem to have spotted a lot of mouldy ice machines as they've been round, and they've asked for advice to be included in the guide, which we were happy to do. Throughout the guide, legal references have had to be updated. And this is a job that the FSA and FSS took on, and I'm very grateful for doing that, a very burdensome job. And finally, guidance on substituted products. This was requested by members as a result of the supply chain volatility that they've been experiencing earlier in the year. Many products weren't delivered, many products were substituted at last minute, and businesses asked us to include guidance on that particular issue. The CCP decision tree that existed in the 2016 version seemed a little bit complex and burdensome for my liking. There seemed to be one extra question we didn't need. So we've been able to slim that down, again with advice from Dr. Lisa Ackley. And that now looks a lot tidier. There was, in the 2016 section, Annex 2 background to legislation. This was written by the FSA back in 2016 and gave the background to all of the regulation. It didn't really add a lot of value. I don't think many business operators actually referred to it. Not only that, but it's extremely burdensome to keep that section up to date. And it's the FSA that would have had to have done that. So they were very happy to agree that we actually remove that section from the guide. One of the major problems is the links. Particularly if we're going to go onto a digital platform, the links will need to be updated. And there are considerably more links to further guidance in this version of the guide than there was in 2016. There seems to have been a big increase in guidance across the board. And increasingly, we're seeing different links for Scotland than it is to England and Wales. So we've been through every single link, and again, I'd like to thank those who took part in the open consultation, because you were very helpful in actually identifying broken links and recommending new links. And this is something that we're going to have to maintain and keep up to date going forward if it's going to keep fresh and up to date. But I am pleased to say that the guide has remained a UK-wide guide. Believe me, there has been pressure, particularly from bodies in Scotland, for there to be devolved and separate guidance. But as we stand today, I'm very happy that we have maintained a UK-wide guide. At the beginning of the project, I said that we wouldn't change the format. So we went ahead and changed the format. We still have the same elements. We still have the introductory paragraph. We still have the how to comply with the law and the good practice section, and the law at the bottom of the page. Previously, in the 2016 edition, the left was down the left-hand column. We've changed this really at the request of businesses. Businesses aren't particularly interested in what annex and which chapter they're complying with. Business want to know, tell me what I have to do. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, tell me what to do to comply with the law. And that is why we've had to put the how to comply section and the good practice sections up front and visible, and put the law down at the bottom. This has been well received by businesses, but it's fair to say there's been a mixed response from enforcement officers who obviously want to use the guide slightly differently in this respect. It is written by industry for industry, and so we have maintained this format for the benefit of businesses. The allergen section has probably been the section that has had the most changes. And there's one fundamental change that we've made here. In 2016, we said that it was optional whether you included your allergen management system within your HACCP system or not. In the meantime, with certain case law and certain policy changes, that position has become untenable. Our logic back in 2016 was that HACCP requires controls to be permanent. And in our view, allergen controls weren't necessarily permanent. They applied to the 2% of the population that came into your business with food hypersensitivity with an allergy. And many businesses escalate their controls when they're aware of a specific allergen request. That was our logic, but that is untenable. So now we have said that allergens must be within your HACCP system. And there's certain controls, certain prerequisite controls, such as training and signage, that must be permanently available. However, we have maintained the principle that where there is an opportunity for that conversation between the customer and the business, that there is an opportunity for the customer to make a specific allergen request, and on that basis, businesses will escalate, may well escalate the control within their kitchen, particularly in relation to cross-contact. But we face a major challenge when looking at that area. This is an industry guide for the food hygiene regulations, the 852/2111 we've all come to know and love. Its sphere of influence does not spread to food information regulations. And therefore, you cannot write an industry guide for food hygiene with the same authority about food information regulations. And that is a challenge that we have faced throughout. And the FSA has reined me back in a few times on this one and made sure that we've kept within scope of 852. We've added subsections on distance selling, not surprising given the increase in online ordering that we've seen over the last few years. And we've also had to increase, obviously, Natasha's Law, PPDS. But here we've just mentioned it and defined it and given links to guidance at either the FSA or FSS. The guidance available there is very good, and there's no point duplicating what is already available to businesses. The substituted products links to the topic we had earlier, again, requested by members in order to help cope with the supply chain volatility that they've been experiencing this year. Within the good practice section of the allergen part, we've introduced this nice little tip on reformulation. That whenever a business reformulate a product and the allergen profile changes, they should rename that product to differentiate it for the consumer. And of course, in this section, we have precautionary allergen labeling, or the may contains. And here we're looking at may contains that either may be in the kitchen or in the supply chain. And we're looking at the risk of cross-contact in the kitchen. Now note my terminology carefully, because I have a few little things that my own little issues here. I don't like to use the word cross-contamination when dealing with allergens in the kitchen. These foods are not contaminants. Foods such as eggs and milk are wholesome foods, and to call them contaminants suggests they are inferior, they are tainted, they are harmful in some way. They are not contaminants, they are allergens, and they should be managed as allergens. Also note that I do not use the word risk assessment when looking at cross-contact in the kitchen. If you want to see an operator turn white and his eyes glaze over in 5 seconds, start talking about risk assessments. I refuse to use the word risk assessment in this guide, and we refer to a thorough review of the risk of cross-contact in the kitchen. The other area that I've looked at is these unregulated allergens. Many of our members are proactive. They ask their customers if they have an allergy that they need to know about in the kitchen before they start preparing their meal. When you start doing that, your customer doesn't just respond with the 14 regulated allergens. You have opened a can here, and you will get anything and everything coming back. So I'm pleased that we've actually been able to include something in this guide that sits outside of the 14 unregulated allergens. I'd like to thank again those who took part in the open consultation, which took place for 8 weeks over July and August. The open consultation was heavily weighted towards enforcement, and we had a lot of responses. And the quality of those responses was very high. It was the same in 2016. Enforcement officers are very knowledgeable, they're experienced, they spend their time in kitchens, they know what's going on, and they came up with very sensible and very practical ideas, many of which, the vast majority of which, have been included in the guide, and the guide is a much better document for that feedback from enforcement officers. And they did a lot to help sort out the links for me as well, by the way. And one area where they were concerned, as well as mouldy ice machines in kitchens, was the use of the words must, should, and may. And they felt that the guide wasn't particularly good at using those terms correctly. So in line with FSA protocols, we've been through the guide front to back and revised and made sure that we're using the words must, use, and may correctly. Going forward, the industry guide will be made available online, free of charge to businesses, operators, and enforcement officers. There will be an enhanced version that is only available to members of UK Hospitality. And the enhanced version will include additional material and information, which we'll be adding over the coming months. Because we now have a digital agile version, it can be maintained and kept up to date a lot easier. And we see that being a very collaborative exercise with the Food Standard Agency and Food Standard Scotland. And thank you very much indeed for your time.